So again, for those of you who just joined us, welcome everyone. Our topic, of course, is related to the article that recently finally came out, Hearts of Champions, related to the astrology of world-class athletes. So we'll be obviously looking at more charts of world-class athletes. But before we do that, let's just quickly review what were some of the factors that were relevant in the charts of individuals who devote their life to athletics, become professional athletes. What were some of the factors that we want to keep in mind when we're looking at these charts? Anyone?
Third house.
Third house, third lord, right? The house most related to sporting activities per se. Of course, it relates to virya, courage, physical activity, prowess, talents, all these sorts of things that are so much a part of athletics. But let's keep in mind that this can show up not just from the birth lagna, but also third house, third lord from the moon. And then also a dasha lagna at any particular one time, right? What else? What else?
Strong Mars.
Mars, just Mars as being karaka, right? And Mars connected to these houses or located in these houses, or Mars connected to the lagna lord, 10th house, 10th lord, is a relevant factor, and just the overall strength of Mars. Connections to the lagna lord in particular can increase a person's competitiveness, desire to participate in these sorts of things. What else?
1, 3, 6, 10 connection.
Right, connections between the third house, third lord, sixth house, sixth lord, and then the first house and the first lord, which represents the individual, and then 10th house and the 10th lord, which of course represents activity in the world.
So strong first house and first lord.
Well, lagna lord obviously is going to boost up the quality of any chart. So, but particular connections to 3 and 6 are things that we saw over and over again in the 10 charts that I had utilized. So 6th house, 6th lord. Why 6th house, 6th lord?
Enemies, overcoming enemies.
Overcoming enemies represents the opponents, represents the competitor, represents the fight, represents the contest, the competition itself, right? And then what would be the equivalent of that from the Jaimini point of view?
Nyati Karaka.
GK, BK. So we're going to look at these charts both from the standpoint of Parashara and Jaimini, and so, you know, looking at those equivalents and the strength of those. And I mentioned certain combinations in Jaimini that show up over and over again also in the charts of professional performers in general, both, you know, artistic performers and also athletic performers. What would be a connection between certain karakas there?
AK, AMK.
Karaka, connection with BK and GK.
Exactly. AMK connection to GK, BK, or connection of the AK with the BK, GK, right? Is what you'll find so often as well. And then, of course, if a person's an exceptionally successful and world-famous athlete, what are we likely to see in the chart?
11th house.
Strong 11th house has to do with honors, awards, with victory, with winning, right?
These combinations forming Raja Yogas and Dana Yogas.
So, of course, success and fame-giving combinations, right? And these can be obviously the obvious things would be Raja yogas, but then, you know, other fame-giving yogas, success-giving yogas. I think you'll find Kesari Yoga and Gajukesari Yoga to be very often a part of these charts this way as well. Any questions about any of that or any further comments about any of that before we start looking at charts?
The most non-intuitive part of the whole lesson was the Buddha Aditya Yoga that we found in some prominent sportsmen.
No, I'm glad you mentioned this. Obviously, Buddha Aditya Yoga it means literally splendor of the intellect and is associated with you know, good intellect, good viveka, intellectual discrimination. But I think it would also, particularly if it's connected to the first house, that'd be a combination for good bodily eye-hand coordination, which again is so much a part of athletes. And you know, I picked those 10 charts, as I said, pretty much at random. And it was interesting to see how often Buddha Aditya Yoga did show up in those charts. And this is something we can look at in the randomly selected charts I pulled out for this class. Anything else then before we go on?
Rahu Dasha.
Say more about that.
A lot of the people, they had, they came into prominence in Rahu Dasha.
That was interesting, wasn't it? And again, we're just going to be looking at these charts and to see with what degree of frequency that happens as well. There's this saying in Jyotish that nothing gives fame the way Rahu gives fame, when it's positioned to do so, right? When it's positioned to do so, and I have found that to be quite, obviously can't be generalized completely, but high degree of frequency. Okay, I'm gonna share screen now. So, just a moment, I'm on the wrong page. So please let me know when you're seeing a chart of an individual. Hank Aaron.
Yeah, we see.
Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay. So who can tell me who Hank Aaron is? You probably have to be an American to know this. Who's Hank Aaron? Anybody?
Well, he was a great baseball player, and I think he's still the home run leader in overall. Isn't he?
Actually, he's not anymore, but he was for a long time. Most notable for breaking Babe Ruth's record this way when he hit number 715. But he's actually considered, he was referred to as Hammerin' Hank Aaron, and one of the greatest baseball hitters of all times. Holds many outstanding major league records. Again, just a world-class baseball player. And also one of the first black athletes to get prominence here in the U.S. and suffered tremendous amount of, you might say, he used to get a lot of death threats when he was getting close to Babe Ruth's number in home runs. It was really kind of a terrible situation that way, and he suffered that, but did it very gracefully. So here you have his chart, Virgo Lagna. And again, just anyone call out something that they see that strikes you as being relevant here to this man's destiny to be a world-class athlete.
The combination of the third house, first house, and the 10th house, Mercury and Mars, in the 6th house of competition.
Right. The thing that should immediately catch your eye is the close conjunction of Mars as the third lord here, Mercury as the first and 10th lord, together in the 6th house of competition. So right there, you have a connection between 1, 10, 3, and 6, right? All with one combination. What else?
Very strong 6th lord, Saturn, who is given a, who is in its sign. Yes, Saturn in Capricorn.
Right. So Saturn is both the 5th and 6th lord for Virgo, but it's the 6th lord, and so it's very strongly placed here. And what do people make of that combination in the 5th house? And it's going to be relevant when we look at some timing here. What would you make of that combination of planets in the 5th house? As far as yogas.
It's a very strong Dana Yoga between Saturn and Venus, because 2nd, 9, and 5th lord together they form multiple Dana Yogas.
Well, of course, you've got the 5th lord in the 5th house, and then with the 9th lord, that's rather good, 5, 9 Raja Yoga. But what should we also realize about this combination of Saturn and Venus, 5th and 9th lord?
It's a Trikona Raja Yoga.
Good, Venkat. It's not just Dana Yoga, but as given in the chapter on Raja Yogas in Parashahora, when 5th lord and the 9th lord combine, particularly in strength, it doesn't just form a Dana Yoga, it also forms a very good Raja Yoga, right?
Well,
so, go ahead.
You've also got the AK with the AMK and the BK all together.
Right. I'm glad you noticed that, Jonathan. You're becoming a Gemini scholar. Right?
It's about time.
Well, you know, better late than never. So that very combination we were talking about, where you've got the AMK, AK, now they're both connected to the BK, right? Someone needs to mute their mic. We're getting a lot of sort of background noise moving around your desk. So please mute your mic if you're not currently speaking. Good. Anything else strike people from the Parashari point of view that might be relevant here? Particularly from Chandra Lagna.
Out of the third and the sixth Jupiter in along with Moon in
10th Lord.
Libra.
So from Chandra Lagna, well, it's Kesari Yoga, of course, from the birth Lagna. But from Chandra Lagna, see how the combination of the Moon and Jupiter become the 10th Lord Moon from there, from Libra. And now Jupiter becomes the 3rd and 6th Lord. And what about this Jupiter? Notice anything special about this Jupiter, Ekaterina?
Vargotama.
It's Vargotama. And you know, have people noticed that Jupiter at this degree, such as in the chart of Bill Clinton, for example, who became president in his Jupiter period, why does Jupiter give such strong results at such a degree? Here it's at a rather extreme standard.
It's going to repeat in many of the divisional charts as Vargotama.
That's it. In so many divisional charts, including the Navamsha, including the Shamsha, and many others, it's going to continue to be in Libra, and therefore it's going to continue to be Vargotama. My observation, I can show you a number of examples that Jupiter gives very, very strong results in such periods. And then look at this combination of the planets in Capricorn from the Moon. Right? What happens then?
The first and the fifth lord, Venus and Saturn, will be in the 4th house. So this would be Raja Yoga also.
And Sasha Yoga from there, right?
And Sasha Yoga, yes, Saturn will give.
From the Moon. So now, who, looking at the degrees of the Moon, can tell me in what period he was born?
He was born in Rahu period.
Born in the early period of Rahu, approximately how many years in Rahu?
Maybe 2-3 years of Rahu had passed.
No, it would have just started, so probably you would have had 16, 17 years.
Couple of years.
15 years.
So of course he started displaying extraordinary ability as a baseball player at a very young age. And of course this would have happened in Rahu, right? Which is fairly, you know, here's your comment, Kumar, about, now his greatest success and fame as a baseball player did not occur in Rahu, but his early years as an early teen and so forth was in his Rahu period. But then what follows Rahu?
Jupiter.
And it was here that he started to become this legendary baseball player. In fact, I think it was his 2nd or 3rd year as a professional, he won the most valuable player for the National League, which is quite an accomplishment for a person that young. And then, of course, what followed Jupiter? Saturn. And it was in Saturn that, you know, he became a legend in Saturn, and particularly for exceeding the home run total of Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth had a total of 714, and on April 4th, 1974, he hit 715. It was this huge, huge media event and this big buildup to it. And does anyone want to guess what sub-period and even sub-period within Saturn this event occurred? Happened in the major period of Saturn. What sub-period?
Saturn, Venus.
That's a very good answer, Venkat. You get the first symbolic chocolate of the day.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
But now who's going to tell me the sub-period?
Moon.
Moon's not a bad guess.
Jupiter?
It was Saturn, Venus, Sun. It was Saturn, Venus, Sun. Why does the Sun, as a sub period here, give such a strong effect?
Because he is the 12th lord, the impressionable lord. So it will give the results of the planet he is conjunct, or yes, in close connection. He will give that effect of the Sasha Yoga and all these Raja Yogas.
And that is the correct answer, Katrina.
Mark, what about it owning 11th from the moon?
Exactly. And then you see this combination from the moon, and it becomes Yogakaraka Saturn with Venus first lord and now Sun the 11th lord. Right? So from you can see it from both perspectives. But what Katrina is saying is important if people don't remember or understand this principle, that the Sun for Virgo as Lord of the 12th becomes, in terms of its ability to give Raja Yoga, a pure impressionable, and will give the results of the stronger category of house lords it's with, in this case, Saturn and Venus. So it was exactly Saturn, Venus, Sun that had this landmark. And it was, of course, a huge publicity. Everybody was talking about Hank Aaron. So we saw that Jupiter and Saturn were the major periods that he had his career. Interesting to see now. Look at the degree of the ascendant here. It's early degrees, but the birth time does come from a written record, and I have no question that it's Virgo Lagna chart, and it's probably safe to assume that it's the first Dashamsha, right? As well. For those of you who've studied this sort of thing, would you consider this Jupiter to be in a Shubha Sankhya Yoga Vargotama in D10? Anyone want to comment on that?
Yes, Ma.
Would you consider that to be the case, Kumar?
Yes, Ma, because moon in this case would be a benefic.
Right. So this is an example of a strong Jupiter because it's Vargotama in a sixth house of D10, but giving good results based on the Shubha Sankhya Yoga because of the 6-8 relationship between the moon and Jupiter. And then, of course, Saturn, right? Saturn is a major period. It's fairly obvious why it could give such good and strong results falling in the Lagna of D10. And of course, if you take house lordships, which I do, it becomes the Yogakaraka planet. Now, something I want to point out, going back to the Jaimini system, think about where the dasha would have started, for those of you who know the calculation of Chara dasha, and identify which major period would have been extraordinary and why for success as an athlete, professional athlete. Which period would have been extraordinary and why? Where would the dasha start? In Chara dasha, where would it start? Where does it always start?
Virgo.
Starts with Virgo. And is the progression, Katrina, going to be forward, direct, or indirect?
It would be Virgo, Leo.
Direct.
Yeah.
Other way. One way to remember this is that for the South Indian style chart, the ones on the corner, right? Leo, Virgo, Libra, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries are always going to be direct. So it's direct. And then therefore, which major period would have proved extraordinary and did prove extraordinary, and why?
Capricorn.
Do you see how obvious that is, folks? Capricorn. I mean, this is what I, as you know, probably have said it too much, is elegant simplicity. And one thing that I like so much about the Jaimini system, here you have the, one of the most powerful Jaimini Raja Yogas, a combination of the AK, AMK with the BK, right? And right when he runs Capricorn, that's the sign. And then look what happens in the 10th house from there. Then you've got a combination of the PK and the DK. And, when he did this record-breaking thing and had so much fame and publicity, it was a major period of Pisces. Now this combination is falling in the 11th from there. remember that. Oh, and then the 11th in there. And the sub-period was Capricorn. So it was a major period of Pisces, sub-period of Capricorn. So you see this, extraordinarily clear timing in the Gemini system. Any comments or further questions or discussions about this chart before we move on?
So, Mark, I have a question, not about the sixth house placement, but Hank Aaron is known to be a very fantastic guy, very mild-mannered person.
Right.
How can we see that from this chart?
Well, when you say he's known to be quite an exceptional
Gentleman. Huh?
gentleman, yeah, that's sort of the right word for it, particularly given all the racial insults and so forth that he had to suffer through. I'm not sure what I would attribute that to specifically. Does anybody else have any sort of ideas about that?
The aspect of Jupiter onto the Lagna Lord Mercury and the conjunction of Jupiter with Moon, both the mind and the man as the Jupiterian influence.
Well, I think that's probably a good thought. Thought. That's Jupiter being the planet of dignity and such a strong Jupiter. Very tight aspect onto Mercury, with which it's also rather closely Trinkona Sambandha. But this conjunction to the Moon, I think, is quite relevant that way as well. I'd have to read more about that. And at the same time, he was a very fierce competitor, right?
Exactly.
The two, which the Mars-Mercury conjunction there certainly accounts for that. But it was an interesting contrast that way. All right, we're going to move on here because there's many more charts I want to discuss. And the chart of another, much more controversial player who was, again, is considered one of the greatest baseball hitters of all time, holds many, many records. One of the records is that he was the most valuable player for the National League 7 times, which is really quite extraordinary. Hank Aaron was, I think, MVP once. But controversial because a scandal around his potential use of performance-enhancing drugs sort of cast a cloud over his accomplishments. I don't know if it was ever, proven for certain, but there was the strong suspicion of it, and he was had to go through some legal machinations around this. So again, what stands out to you here, relevant to the factors that we were highlighting at the beginning of the webinar?
The Moon-Sun mutual aspect not only means a full moon, but also a 9-10 Raja Yoga. And the aspect of Mars onto the Moon brings the Lagna Lord into the connection.
Good, very good perception, Venkat. Venkat's recognizing that for anyone with Scorpio Lagna, as it says in Parashara Hora, the best combination is that of the sun and the moon, because the sun only rules the strongest angle and the moon only rules the strongest triangle. It doesn't have the taint, the blemish of ruling any other houses. And of course, this yoga is most powerful when the sun and the moon are across from each other, indicating that the moon is nearly perfectly full here. It's just some 4 degrees past complete fullness. And it's happening along the third 3-9 axis, right? So, and he mentions the additional aspect of Mars onto that moon as well.
And sun also forms, sun flanked by Venus and Mercury is a Shubha Ubhyachari Yoga.
Good. So the 10th Lord here in the 9th house, which is Raja Yoga placement by itself, is then also the focal point and the beneficiary. It's not a pure Shubha Ubhyachari Yoga, but the fact that Venus is on one side, Mercury's on the other, Mars and Rahu here is the blemish on it from that standpoint. but it's still a sun, a 10th lord involved in a Shubha Vichara yoga. What else strikes people?
Just a question mark on that Shubha Ubhyachari yoga. The aspect of Saturn onto Mercury, will it not make Mercury malefic?
No, in this case, well, I mean, it turns more malefic because it's only under malefic influence, but when counting such yogas, all right,
Okay.
Aspected by Jupiter also, Mercury.
Aspected by Jupiter, yeah. It retains, when counting that type of yoga, you know, you just focus on its natural characteristics as a benefic.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the fact that, you know, Mercury does get the aspect of Saturn and Jupiter there, that has interpretive significance insofar as, you know, Mercury here. And I think some of the taint around his, you know, professional reputation and so forth has to do with the fact that this, you know, 8th lord is in the 10th, aspected by Saturn, but it's still Shubha Vichara yoga.
Also, Mars is the GK, and the natural karaka for athletics owns the 6th house, where he's got the AK Jupiter.
Right. So you've got the Lagna lord here, ruled both by the first. Mars is both the first lord and the 6th lord, is what I'm trying to say, and Saturn here is the 4th lord in the 4th house, but it's also the 3rd lord, so Swakshetra, 3rd lord. What do people make of this combination in Gemini?
Substance abuse?
It could. It could be one of the things it's related to.
Communication, Gemini.
Well, just insofar as yogas. And I want you to consider that combination both from the birth lagna and from Chandra lagna.
Kind of Arishta yoga, because it involves the Lagna lord. From ascendant, Lagna lord is with the 12th lord, and on the Rahu Ketu axis, I mean malefics.
There certainly can be some quality of Arishta there. Is there anything that would then break that?
Ava yoga.
Ava yoga. That's what she's calling. You know, that's she's saying the Arishta. That's the Ava yoga is another. An Arishta related to the Lagna lord. You can call it Ava yoga, but you can just generally categorize it as an Arishta yoga. You know, there's a negative side to this, but wouldn't people also see that there'd be a positive side?
Yeah, that's a Raja yoga, Venus Mars. Because that's
the Venus-Mars combination is the Lagna lord with the 7th lord, so an angled trine. And then see this combination from the moon, both where it falls and what kind of combination it becomes from the moon.
So 4-5 Raja
Venus
yoga
becomes the yoga karaka.
Venus becomes the yoga karaka. Mars from there becomes the 4th lord. So it becomes, the point I'm making here, folks, is when planets form angled trine combinations from both the birth lagna and from the moon, it's something to pay attention to in terms of their ability to give Raja Yoga power, the effects of Raja Yoga. And of course, in what house does these planets in Gemini fall from the moon?
6th house.
6th house, right. And so which period was he born in?
On a moon.
Born in the early part of the moon dasha, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 8 years remaining or so.
That's right.
Followed by
Mars.
So that now he's going to start to become a teenager. It means he's for sure starting to play baseball and starting to show extraordinary abilities to play baseball. And then followed by who?
Rahu.
18 years of Rahu. So he became this most valuable player, all-star baseball player, in his Rahu major period, which would have run from about age 14 up to age 30, right? Or 32, around in there, prime years, prime athletic years. First of all, what do we know about Rahu in Gemini?
very good placed.
Yeah.
Some even consider it like in an own sign.
It's the
Depending on
moon.
which,
In the sense of benefics, Rahu is considered well.
right. Well, you're on the right track here, Ekaterina. And then I heard someone say it. If you go by Parashara Hora, which is what I go by, it's defined as being its Mula Trikona sign. And you will find that Rahu gives very strong results. What kind of results depends on other factors, but very strong results in Gemini. You only need to look at the chart of Adolf Hitler and others, Britney Spears, to see that.
It's a nodal Raja Yoga in the 8th house because, oh, sorry, it cannot be. Sorry.
But this is one of those instances where Rahu's giving in an exaggerated way, Prabhalau, the results of the Raja Yogas that Venus and Mars gives as an angle trine combination, both from the birth lagna and from the moon, and seeing that it's falling in the 6th house of competitive sports from the moon. Right? And you can even sort of think about what kind of combination this is from Dasha Lagna, right? Where Venus becomes the 5th lord in the 1st, Raja Yoga Pal, with Mars, who's now the 6th and 11th lords, right? And then, of course, after Rahu, we moved into what?
Jupiter.
And here we see Jupiter in the 6th. Now, I mentioned he had an extraordinary run where he was the most valuable player for, I think, 7 years. That first happened. Anybody want to guess within what sub-period within Rahu that happened? Happened in the major period of Rahu for a series of years, 1990, 92, 93. You'll have to excuse me, I keep coughing. I'm just getting over a cold, I'm sorry. What sub-period?
Rahu Venus.
You're hot today, Venkat. It was exactly Rahu Venus. And remember the articles I've written about Rahu Venus, how, not always, but in certain charts, that period and sub-period not only is a relationship giving period, but often, creates some real defining moments in a person's life. Of course, depending on the Rahu and Venus. And it turned out to be the case here. And then in the early 2000s, like from 2001 to 2004, he was, again, consecutively, in those consecutive years, the most valuable player, an unprecedented feat. This would have been in Rahu Saturn. Would have been in Rahu Saturn. Not what Rahu Saturn, I'm sorry, Jupiter Saturn, folks. I misspoke. Jupiter Saturn. Does Jupiter have any source of strength there?
Swan D9.
Yeah.
Good. You're very quick on that, Neelima. Yes, Swan D9. But I think you have to see these planets in Navamsha to sort of understand the kind of results this period and sub-period gave as well. Here, Jupiter now becomes the 10th lord in the 10th house, and Saturn in its own sign, and Saturn Swakshetra, both in the birth chart and in Navamsha, folks, to get some idea of why Saturn gave such strong results. But then, interesting enough, here you see the situation here. People have probably heard me say this before, but you'll find that Gajikeshu and Keshu Yoga is a very effective combination it's an effective combination in Rashi. I'm not saying it isn't, but when a planet is configured in such in the divisional charts, it usually delivers those kind of results. Now, getting back to remember Rahu Venus, you'll see Venus and Mars are Vargotama relative to this division. Most of his professional career, a lot of the height of his professional career from the Jaimini point of view, was the Pisces major period, which would have lasted how long? How long was the Pisces major period?
11?
So would have been full
12 years?
11
How many?
11 years.
11?
11 years, good. Counting's in reverse, 12 minus 1 gives 11. So it's a fairly long period. What strikes people about this period? Just in terms of success during it.
The 11th house has got AMK, PK.
The 11th house has the AMK and AMK PK combination is manifesting from there. So you could also
Sun is
take-
in the 10th house from Pisces.
Sorry?
The sun is in the 10th house from 9th house from Pisces. But you
It is?
can't.
It is.
No. I was thinking.
Actually, from Pisces, it goes to the 5th house. Sun is in the 9th house from the birth log.
Yeah, from Pisces it goes to the 5th house. That's true.
But it's, again, just this simple principle that you all learned when you took my Essentials of January class that, of course, I'm just passing along what I've learned from K and Rao, that generally speaking, A and K falling in the 9th, 10th, or 11th, particularly when configured in additional Raja Yogas, is a successful good period. All other things being equal. What does, in terms of some Jaimini concept, what does Pisces additionally benefit from here?
Many arguers. Pisces gets arguer from the 2nd house, Jupiter, from the 4th house, 3 planets, or if we don't consider Rahu, and from the 11th house moon. So many arguers to the.
That's it.
Pisces.
That very good recognition on your part. To understand why Pisces gave the results of this, you have to see that. And the idea with Argo, the more the better, right? The more planets forming them, and the more ways, argular positions here, in which case, virtually the 3 principal argular positions are all containing planets with no obstruction. I take that back. There is some obstruction in case of the Jupiter here.
Jupiter, yeah.
Jupiter here, but you have to consider whether Jupiter's Navamsha position trumps that or not. No obstruction from the moon and no obstruction from the Venus-Mars argulus. Right? Okay.
Mark.
Yes.
What about the Aries period? Because from Aries, wouldn't that Jupiter Mercury mutual aspect, essentially Gemini Raja Yoga, wouldn't that be a Maharaja Yoga?
No. Well, you mean from a dynamic point of view. Well, first of all, the Aries period. The Aries period was also an extremely successful period. The thing is, it only lasted a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
But it was a very successful period. In which case, you've got the AK-PK combination. I think maybe what you're asking me, does that form a temporary dynamic sort of Maharaj Yoga?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, I would say that it does. In any event, it's a very good Raja Yoga that a strong Jupiter is getting here in the 1st house, and then now the AMK is falling 10th from there.
Yes.
And if those of you who took my Jaimini level 2 class, you may remember this particular source of strength that planets get in the Jaimini system when a sign, not planets, when a sign is getting the influence of both Jupiter and Mercury, which is what Aries getting here. So yes, this was an exceptional period for him. I was just highlighting the Pisces period because it encompassed a much greater period of his career.
Okay.
But certainly the Aries period. So I'm happy that you drew attention to that. All right, moving on here. We're going to leave baseball, and I would be surprised if anyone, you maybe have to be from Minnesota or be a Notre Dame football fan. Does anybody recognize the name Alan Page?
Was he a football player?
Yes, he was considered one of the greatest defensive linemen ever to play the game, and was only one of 2 defensive players ever to win the most valuable player for the National Football League.
Yeah. So just a disclaimer. I used to live in Minneapolis, and I'm a great fan of Minnesota Vikings.
Well, then naturally you're going to know who Alan Page was. And what's extraordinary about him is that, and one of the reasons I chose to use his chart here, is not only was he a world-class, athlete, but he went on to be a Supreme Court Justice of Minnesota. In other words, very, very high-ranking judicial person. I think the first African-American to ever hold such a position in the Minnesota Supreme Court. And is quite a dignified character. I actually had the pleasure of standing next to him once when I lived in Chicago. And towards the end of his career, he lived in Chicago, and he was gigantic. Next to me, he looked like a giant, but very dignified looking individual, and both in his appearance and in his behavior. So an exceptional person, aside from having been a world-class athlete. But now, getting back to the athletic career, what strikes people as relevant here?
The combination of the first Lord Saturn and the fifth Lord Venus in the 6th house.
Well, Venus is ruling what other house?
Oh, 10th house too, sorry.
10th house. It's a yoga karaka.
So it's the Yoga Karaka in the 6th house of competition with the first Lord, who's the first Lord in the 6th, and with our friend Rahu again, right?
Yeah, friend Rahu. And one cannot have a darker moon, I suppose.
Well, it is pretty much a complete Amavasya moon, right?
Yeah, complete Amavasya.
Yet, at the same time, it is, of course, the moon in Cancer in its own sign as the 7th Lord in the 7th house, right?
Yeah.
From the standpoint of him becoming a judge, a major sort of judicial figure, what strikes you here?
9th house, Jupiter.
Jupiter goes to the 9th. People maybe should notice also that it's the 9th Lord from the moon aspecting onto its own 9th house. Right? And again, looking at the moon, just kind of to see when this person's career as an athlete took place, what dasha was this person born in?
Mercury.
Mercury. Approximately, can you say approximately how many years remaining in Mercury?
About 8, maybe 8 or 9.
12.
Pretty good guess. Let's say 9. Okay. Let's say 9. So that after Mercury is going to move into K2, right? How many years?
7, 15.
So obviously he's getting involved in athletics by then, right? Getting involved in athletics by then. K2, of course, what's good about this 3rd house? And K2 is going to give the results of that to some degree. What's good about
Jupiter and Saturn both aspect.
Aspect of its own Lord Jupiter in particular, right? Aspect of its own Lord Jupiter.
And what about
then,
K2 being 6 from the moon?
It is 6 from the moon, but then really his stellar athletic career as first a All-American college football player at Notre Dame, and then later with in the professional ranks with 2 teams, mostly the Minnesota Vikings and then the Chicago Bears, all took place in his Venus Mahadasha. Right? The Yoga Karaka in the 6th house, forming, what kind of combination is Venus and Saturn for this lagna?
That'd be a Maharaja Yoga?
Raja Yoga, right? 1-5.
Raja.
Well, it's not going to be Maharaja Yoga because it's not appearing in either the 1st or the 5th house, Venkat, but it's among the best. It's among the best angle trine combinations that you can have. Why? Why is this such a superior Raja Yoga? This combination of Venus and Saturn.
Because Venus rules only benefic houses, 5th and 10th, it's Yogakaraka, and Saturn also rules the first house, which is considered the good house, and second house, which is impressionable. So
that's it.
only benefic
It has
houses.
to do, there's no blemish of them being lording any of the Trishadais houses, right? And so they're purely, it's a blemishless Raja Yoga, superior Raja Yoga. And also, is there something, these Venus combinations, Venus-Saturn combination, what else becomes good about them? Why do Venus and Saturn typically form very good horoscopic yogas, combinations?
They're good friends.
They're good friends. So anybody but Venkat gets to answer this question because he's already answered it twice now. In what sub period do you think the pinnacle of his career, when he was named not just the defensive player of the year, but the most valuable player, the only one of two, Lawrence Taylor was the only other defensive player that ever was voted the most valuable player for a year in the National Football League. Does anybody want to indicate what sub period that would have happened in the Venus major period?
That's Rahu.
You're following Venkat's lead, Jay, and you're absolutely correct. It was Venus Rahu. And, of course, Rahu's giving the effects of these yogas only in a more exaggerated way. And here again, we have Rahu and Gemini. So this Venus Rahu together in the 6th house with the Lagna Lord is when he was at the pinnacle of his career as a professional athletic competitor. Now, what do you notice of, in terms of the source of strength here? Obviously, what's Venus's dignity in the birth chart? Can anybody tell me?
In the house of a good friend.
Correct. It's in the house of a great friend. Right?
Great friend, yes, because Mercury is close, so yeah.
Very good, very good. And then what do you notice about Venus and Saturn here?
Parivartana. Exchange of signs.
They're an exchange, of course, giving an additional source of strength to both of them. Interestingly enough, remember it was Rahu, Venus Rahu, when he had this professional peak. And here we see they're both well placed insofar as one's in an angle, one's in a triangle. Venus is the major lord here, is in its debilitation sign. Does anyone see any factor for cancellation here?
It's exaltation dispositor is in a Kendra.
That's it, Kumar. Hey, you get the prize on this one. Very good. Very good. So Venus's exaltation sign is Pisces, ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is in an angle here. I don't know if I'd consider it the most effective form of cancellation, but it is one factor. Right? And regardless, Venus obviously gave very strong results here. The question then becomes, because there is this factor of cancellation, and then Venus is also in an angle, what could it therefore also be giving? It appears did give.
Nichabanga Raja Yoga.
Nichabanga Raja Yoga. Which, if you haven't heard me say this before, folks, that is as an effective sort of yoga in the birth chart, in the divisional charts as in the birth chart, in my experience. And I think in my different writings and instruction materials, I've given many, many examples of this. Now, we talked about this Amavasya moon. I'm going from memory here, and I'd have to double check it to be sure, but I'm pretty certain this is correct. He became an associate judge of the Supreme Court of Minnesota in his moon Jupiter period. In his moon Jupiter period. might seem a little surprising. But then think about the seventh house and what it can mean.
Yeah.
What am I referring to?
Public, the other.
Other Prapti,
Prapti meaning what?
high position.
The position giver, right? Don't know that I would have, well, what's also relevant here, it's not only a, because the moon has benefics on both sides of it, the sun has benefics on both sides of it, it gives rise to a Shubha Vichara Yoga, but then this is also a what? Not blemishless, but what is it? The fact that Venus and Mercury on both sides of the moon gives what?
Durdara Yoga.
Shubha Durdara Yoga.
Yeah, Shubha Durdara Yoga, yes.
Durdara Yoga. The sun here is just, one of those pure impressionables again. But, I'm pretty certain it was in Moon Jupiter that he got this very high judicial position. All right, so we're going to move on here. This is another American football player, quarterback, who was also an all-star and also an MVP one year. Went on to have a very successful career in sports broadcasting. And aside being a sports TV broadcaster and sports commentator, he has one of the most successful sports talk radio shows that's broadcast in the New York area, my understanding. I was told this, I never have heard or listened to it myself. And once again, my question is, what seems relevant to you here so far as a career destiny of being a world-class successful athlete?
Strong third lord, aspected by Mars.
Strong third lord, obviously here, because Saturn is the second lord in the second house. It's also the third lord. So walk straight to third and second lord. Additional aspect of Mars. Note here that there is a strong aspect. Well, first of all, does Mars have any source of strength here?
Vargotama.
Vargotama, aspecting the Lagna, right? And the Lagna Lord, both. Everyone see that? Mars aspects both the Lagna Sagittarius and also Lagna Lord Jupiter, who's getting its debilitation canceled here by being with its sign lord. What else strikes people as being relevant?
Very strong sixth house. The lord of sixth house, Venus, is exalted, and moon also exalted in the sixth house. So sixth house strong, aspected by Lagna Lord Jupiter, which makes the connection with the Lagna competitiveness.
Very good. Very good. Just breaking it down, because there was a lot of things that she was referring to there. We noted that there's a strong third lord, but there's an even stronger sixth lord, getting very near its highest degree of exaltation, and it's conjunct both the 10th house, so there's a 6-10 connection, but it's also aspecting onto the 10th house, so that gives another 6-10 connection. Notice that Saturn as the third lord is aspecting this combination. So really what it is, folks, it's a 6-3-10 connection, right? Now, she mentions that the 6th house also gets, it's occupied by a dark but moon in its exaltation sign aspected by Jupiter. But then at one point, I'm going to ask you to see things from a very strong Chandra Lagna. Who's the third lord from Chandra Lagna?
Moon.
The moon, right? And then who's the sixth lord from Chandra Lagna?
Venus.
Venus.
It's this exalted Venus again. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
So Kumar mentioned that, one of the things that came out with the random selection of 10 charts in that first article is how frequently things were happening in the Rahu period, either the Rahu major period, the Rahu subperiod. We've already seen that, although more is a couple cases is a major period, but also a couple cases of a subperiod providing a peak. I ask once again, the moon being at 1126 of Taurus, in what period did this person start life? Moon period, and again, approximately how many?
8 years probably left.
Probably about 8 years, right? And so by the time he ended Mars, which, you're going to get what? You're going to get 8 and 7 is going to 15. He's playing football, right? Probably other sports as well. But then 18 years of Rahu, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of the same thing we saw in the chart of Barry Bonds in terms of the expression. So the majority of his great success, first as a college football player, and then as a professional, took place in Rahu. And just in terms of being able to give, a high level of, well, first of all, why is he playing sports in Rahu? Is there any principle that you've learned from me or elsewhere that could predict that sports would be happening in the Rahu major period?
The third word from Rahu, from Dasha Lagna, is exalted Venus, very strong, third word.
So, part of it is the answer of Dasha Lagna, the exalted moon with the aspect of Jupiter goes to the 10th from there. And then, the third and 10th Lord becomes this. But is there another way that it might be predictable just by Rahu itself, not by any patterning from Rahu, but just from Rahu itself, that he could be engaging in sports during this time?
Yeah, Rahu Nakshatra of Ketu, which is in third from.
That's it. I'm applying what we've all heard me refer to as Udu's clue here. Right? That's Rahu in Magha, Ketu's nakshatra with Ketu in the third. But then in terms of, excuse me, his success during this period, how?
Well, can I just mention that I think it's a very, very strong Shubha Ubhayachari yoga that's given by Rahu, right?
Because Rahu is giving the results of the sun?
Yes.
Okay. Now this is an interesting consideration. First of all, obviously the sun is, what do we notice about the sun here? Of course, it's exalted. It's the 9th one and the 5th, right? Which is more Dhan yoga than it is Raja yoga. So why is Rahu giving a strong result? This becomes an interesting consideration because I would say definitely that the sun is involved in a good Voshi yoga, a very good Voshi yoga, right? But would you consider it to be in Shubha Ubhachari yoga?
Yes.
If so, why? If so, why not?
The moon is a dark moon, and it's a malefic moon, so it wouldn't fall into a Shubha Upachari.
Well, it doesn't matter because of the sun, the moon, or the sun can't get configured in a lunar yoga, and the moon can't be a part of a solar yoga. Shubha Upachari yoga can only involve the three benefics, Mercury, Sun, and Jupiter. Okay. So really, that does not apply here. Now,
Mark, he was born on Akshaya Tritiya day. Looks like both the luminaries are exalted.
say this again.
I think he was born on Akshaya Tritiya day, one of the good Muhurta days, where both the luminaries are exalted.
Well, and can you say more about this, and what that would sort of suggest?
I mean, from what I know, it's a day where you do not see a Muhurta at all, since both the luminaries are so powerful up in the sky.
But obviously, we're not talking about a Muhurta.
No.
What can it mean? What can it mean in terms of a natal horoscope?
It's just a strong chart to have both the luminaries exalted.
It is. And from Dasha Lagna, you'll see that one goes to the 9th, one goes to the 10th.
10th.
Right? Really, it's more from Dasha Lagna that, well, I mean, obviously Rahu giving as results of the sun, the 9th and the 5th is a good combination, but I think you have to see Rahu also in the Dashamsha to understand why it gave the results it did in terms of his professional success.
Mm.
So, Mark, I have a question. So, if you look at the 6th and the 4th, it has got the malefic hemi. So, how does that impact?
Well, I would say that's quite mild. You know, the sun here, I don't even know that I would count it as that much of a malefic here in K2. So I would not consider the planets here in the 4th house to suffer much from any sort of malefic hemi. That'd be my own view.
Okay.
Now, if it was Mars and Saturn on both sides, or Rahu and Saturn, it'd be a different story.
Okay.
Now, it's interesting to consider this, and I think I've used this chart before, but I used it when I was teaching Jaimini because it's a kind of a textbook illustration that way. What Jaimini combination here is very relevant to what we're talking about and what we've seen before.
AK, MK, BK.
This combination of just the same thing we saw in the chart of Hank Aaron. They were all together in his case. In this case, there's you know, BK and AMK together, and they make a mutual Rashi Drishti with AK Mars. And strength of planets here. Mars is Vargotama, Venus is getting highly exalted, and what condition would we consider Mercury in here?
Sure.
Nichabanga, Raja Yoga.
Nichabanga Raja Yoga, or just at least Nichabanga from the standpoint of seeing the Jaimini point of view. Now, he had his greatest success in the high point of his professional career was in the, let me make sure I'm not talking wrongly here.
Should be the Mithun Dasha.
Gemini.
It was in the Gemini major period. I just wanted to make sure I was correct about that. And to see how classic and how predictable that was. You know, whether you knew this person played professional sports, was a professional athlete, but any, you know, beginning Jaimini student who's taken my Essentials Jaimini course should have recognized the significance of the Gemini period. And then what sub-period do you think he won the most valuable? He won 1 year, unlike Barry Bonds, he only won the MVP 1 year of his career, which is still quite an achievement. Does anyone want to guess what sub-period that happened in?
Gemini Pisces.
Oh, you guys are just so good. Yes. Gemini Pisces is the obvious choice and turned out to be correct. And so again, this could not be more elegant simplicity, right? Period and sub-period activating these Raja Yogas in Gemini Pisces. Okay. Now we're going to switch to tennis. Martina Navratilova, if I said that correctly, and is considered one of the greatest female athletes of all time, certainly one of the greatest tennis players of all time, dominated the sports for decades, played some of the most, you know, legendary matches. Her match with Chris Efford, I forget which year, was considered the greatest tennis match between two women of all times. What was notable about her is she was the #1 ranked singles woman for five years consecutively, which is a record between 1981 and 1986. She was also doubles champion, besides being singles champion. So extraordinary tennis career. And I love her chart for illustrating some really interesting and notable interpretive principles in Jyotish. But before we start looking at the dynamic expression of those, let's look at the static potential. What, if anything, strikes people in this case?
Lord of the Lagna and the 10th house, Jupiter, in conjunction with the Lord of the third, Venus, in the 6th house.
Right. So the very obvious, 3-10-6 connection here is the 10th Lord goes to the 6th with Venus, who's the third Lord. And
Aspected by Mars.
aspected by Mars. Does Mars have any strength here near the Mars? Do you see any source of strength from Mars?
Fine, D9.
It's an exchange.
In exchange with Saturn in the Rashi.
Yeah, can I just add for this? This exchange, and generally, even if it's mutual aspect between Mars and Saturn, it's a very, very valuable for a competitor.
No question.
Yeah.
No question. And by the way, you're correct. It's Swa in D9. So very, very, very strong Mars. But now think about this. We've got the Jupiter-Venus combination, which is 10 and 3. But what about this Mars-Jupiter combination?
9, 10,
1, 9.
1, 9, 9, 10.
It's a
Raja.
1, 2.
1 9 Raja.
One of the best angle trine combination, maybe the best angle trine combination for Pisces is the Mars-Jupiter combination. Why? Again, somebody other than Ekaterina, because I know she knows this very well. Why?
Jupiter owns only the 2 Kendras, and Mars owns the 9th house, and the 2nd house is an impressionable neutral. So
That's
it's a blemishless Raja Yoga.
Right. Superior Raja Yoga. And does Jupiter have any source of strength?
Jupiter.
And again.
Swa in Navamsha.
Swan Navamsha. Does Venus have any source of strength?
Again, it's fine, D9.
Look at this combination, folks. Mars, Swa in the Vamsha, Jupiter, Swa in the Vamsha, Venus, Swa in the Vamsha.
Also, there's a 4-5 Raja Yoga too. Mercury Moon.
Right, 9-10 is a little more significant. But
9-10.
They form that as well now. And this is what I always found interesting about this chart and the unfoldment of it. So her career rise in the world of tennis as a teenager began in the K2 Mahadasha. So what strikes you about that?
Okay, so third.
Well, it gives indirectly, obviously, it gives directly Venus results, which indirectly gives Jupiter Mars.
Exactly. First of all, it's in the third house. Right? She's playing sports. It's giving the results of this of Venus, which is a part of this Venus-Jupiter-Mars combination. But then after K2, what happens?
Venus.
20 years. 20 years of Venus. So essentially she gets not just 20 years of Venus, she gets 26 years of Venus because of the way in which K2's giving this result. Now see the influences on K2 as well. Aspected by Mars, aspected by this Saturn, who's the 11th Lord, right? It's very clear why she's, being such an intensely competitive sort of situation during this time. But now here's the key question again. Why does Venus give Raja Yoga?
Because of this Viparita Raja Yoga, Venus is in exchange with Sun, and they're both the 6 and 8 houses, the Stern houses. So this.
That's a secondary reason, Ekaterina. You know the more primary
Yeah,
reason.
the 8th Lord,
Venus
impressionable.
owns the 8th Lord, impressionable Lord, and gives results of Jupiter Mars.
That's it. Venus as an 8th Lord, one of the impressionable lords, will give the results of the stronger house lord it's with it, as well as the other house it rules. Who's the strongest house lord that it's with here?
Jupiter, the 10th Lord.
Jupiter is the 10th Lord. And so we have to say, okay, what effects is Jupiter going to get? And then we're into this beautiful 9-10 Raja Yoga out of the house of sports competition. You see? Ketu gives that result, and then Venus gives that result. So it's a total result of 26 years, which speaks to her. She was excelling in her early 40s. She started in her late teens or mid-teens, and was professional until her early 40s. Now, the peak period when she had been, #1 singles person for, well, I don't have it here. I'd have to go back and see exactly. But which Charadasha do you think would have proved extraordinary? Or one in particular that would have proved extraordinary?
Leo or even Scorpio?
Leo. Leo did. And of course, how many years would Leo have been?
10. 10 years.
The counting's in reverse. 10 minus 1, 11 minus 1, 10 years. So see how the dasha favors her. She runs Ketu and Venus, total 26 years. And then among that, a Chara dasha of 10 years in Leo with the conjunction of AMK and AK. Both of these planets have strength. You should have been, any Gemini conversant person should have been able to spot that particular period as being particularly extraordinary as far as giving her Raja Yoga at a glance.
And also there is some beautiful unobstructed Argala forming onto Leo.
Well, say more about that.
Mercury is in the second house, and there is nothing in Cancer. And
Mercury at extreme exaltation.
Extreme exaltation, yes.
And we said Venus is Swakshetra in the birth chart, but it's also in an exchange.
Yeah.
And note from Leo, the exchange becomes 1-3 when she runs Leo. Right?
Yeah.
Mark, there is one yoga from Moon and from the ascendant. Is it Chandra Adi Yoga and Lagna Adi Yoga?
Well, I've been waiting for someone to mention that because Venus is also giving this result.
Yes.
As usual, Ekaterina, I can rely on you for these things. Now, it's a very...
The 6, 8, and 6, 7, 8 from Moon or from Lagna?
Right. It's not the best Chandra or Lagna Adi Yoga because you don't have an even distribution in 6, 8, or 12, but you do have all the benefics, Venus, Jupiter. With either Chandra Adi Yoga or Lagna Adi Yoga, the most important thing is that there's a benefic in the 7th from there.
Yeah.
Important thing, because what's the idea behind these yogas? It's the way in which the houses on either side of either the Lagna or the Moon get supported by benefics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course here, because the Moon and the birth Lagna are the same, all the patterning of the chart repeats from both the birth Lagna and Chandragna, and then condition of these planets. Her Venus period was truly an extraordinary period for an athlete. You'll find few periods that an athlete has had more sustained success and the level of success that she had in her Venus Mahadasha. And it's a result of this, what I heard referred to as the pile-on effect. It's not just a result of Venus giving the results of just one yoga, in this case, the 9-10 Raja Yoga, but it's also a part of a pretty strong Chandra and Lagna Adi Yoga, both. So really appreciate you mentioning this. This is why you have to come to our webinars all the time, Katrina. We need you for this. Okay, what else?
So I have a question, Mark, on the Venus period, but in general, outside of sports, for Pisces Lagna, generally Venus is not considered a great planet, right?
No, it's not. It's considered a functional malefic, but just like with everything, Jay, you have to look at some horoscopic combination, and you have to ask yourself the question, what's the best thing that this could mean? And then on the other side, what are some unfavorable things it could mean? Of course, she suffered some debilitating injuries during this time. Lagna Lord in the 6th, with the 8th Lord aspected by Mars and aspected by Saturn. So yes, of course there's going to be some level of Arishta. But my God, what a competitor.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Can I
When you
mention,
say,
can I mention
sorry,
something about Venus, by the way?
go ahead.
Now,
Who's
it's
speaking? Who's
George.
speaking? Oh, Georgie, please go ahead.
So, because we know that Martina Navratilova is essentially, you know, she's in terms of relationship, she's
lesbian.
Yes, yes, and can we kind of account for that with Venus obviously as a relationship indicator, being in the sixth house and aspected by both Mars and Saturn?
Well, it's a heavily afflicted Venus from that standpoint. I don't know if that alone would make one homosexual.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, George, I have no good, reliable, predictable parameters for this sort of thing.
Okay.
So if you're asking, could be part of the contribution to that, I just don't know.
Oh, you know, actually what I see right now, because you may see that actually Saturn is in very close conjunction with Rahu, basically within a degree. And Rahu is unusual, non-traditional, so Saturn should be giving some Rahu effect. So that may be the case.
Maybe, but it's not related to the seventh house of the seventh lord. It is related to Karaka Venus. Right? So, you know, I think my answer is I just don't know. It's interesting to consider, but I just don't know. All right, we're gonna go on here.
Just mark one more observation about Venus. Venus is the lord of the eighth in the sixth, aspected both by Mars and Saturn. Should be forming a good Viparita Raja Yoga.
So this is the idea that Ekaterina brought up originally, and it's an interesting consideration because then we would have Venus forming Raja Yoga in the traditional way. We'd have it be forming Viparita Raja Yoga, which, by the way, is very good for a person in competition coming back from a losing position and turning it into a winning position, which she oftentimes did. She'd be down in a match, and she'd pull the match out by fighting back at the end. But then it's also part of these Chandra and Lagna yoga. So this multiple yoga effect. And with the planet strong, whose nakshatra is Venus in?
Its own nakshatra?
Its own nakshatra. So Uru's clue puts right back into Venus when she runs Venus, right?
Yep.
Really quite exceptional. I love talking about her horoscope in terms of interpretive principles of Jyotish. It illustrates many. Okay. I mean, we haven't even talked about it wasn't when she was actively playing tennis, but look at this Bhadra Yoga, right? Influencing the Lagna. It's almost extreme degree, and it's Bhadra Yoga both from the birth chart and from Chandra Lagna, since they're the same. It's a pretty substantial Mahapurush Yoga. Right?
Mark, in the way you say this, that Venus is back in its own nakshatra, does that kind of give it some kind of a Vargotama effect? Or
well, it's always good. It's always good. It's always good for, I'm not sure it makes the planet as strong as Vargotama. I could consider it a positive, favorable factor when a planet is in its own nakshatra.
Thank you.
Now we're going to look. Does anyone recognize this name? It's another woman. Anybody recognize this name?
Great
athlete. Athlete.
Considered the fastest woman in history. She set world records in the 100 meters and 200 meters in the 1988 Olympics that I believe may still stand. I'd have to check that. But she was also known for her very flamboyant personality and the outfits, the track outfits
exactly
that she wore, which she used to design herself. So, and actually, unfortunately, died tragically. Had an epileptic seizure in her sleep at age 38 and passed, at that young age. But notable Olympic athlete, notable sprinter, woman, Afro-American. What really just sort of immediately stands out to you about her chart in terms of being a very fast sprinter?
Strong third house, third lord.
obviously Lagna Lord and 10th Lord in the third, with the third Lord, Swakshetra. And you have Jupiter there, so think about the Mercury-Jupiter combination. This is exactly what we've seen over and over again. It's 1, 3, 10 plus Raja Yoga. 1, 3, 10 plus Raja Yoga. Right? Anything else strike you that is relevant here?
Venus Moon.
Venus Moon, Jaimini Raja Yoga.
Yeah.
Venus Moon, Jaimini Raja Yoga, which when we look at the timing of when she set her Olympic records, you'll see that that's relevant, Nidima. So I'm glad you brought that up. But I want people to also note that there's the aspect of the sixth Lord Saturn onto the Lagna. So there's a 1-3 connection, there's a 1-6 connection, there's a 3-10 connection, and there's a 6-10 connection because Saturn also aspects the 10th house. This is just the kind of thing that we've seen over and over again that predicts this type of involvement in competitive athletics.
Also, Mark, Saturn being the Lord of the fifth in the fourth is a Raja Yoga itself. And the aspect of Saturn onto Rahu forms another nodal Raja Yoga.
Right. Now consider the whole thing from the moon, folks. Who's the 10th and 3rd Lord?
Swa.
Swa Venus.
Yes.
Yes.
Swa Venus in the 3rd house.
Yeah.
And then what about this combination now in Scorpio?
It is the Yoga Karaka Mars with Jupiter, which will be which is a 4-5 Raja Yoga.
So now the Jupiter-Mars combination becomes, it becomes a multiple both Raja and Dhan Yoga, right?
Yep.
Mars
Yeah.
becomes a very well-placed Yoga Karaka from here. And, you know, it might seem surprising. Well, what other yoga exists here that is quite relevant as well that I've mentioned before?
Kesari Yoga.
There's Kesari Yoga here. And what about this moon? What do you notice about this moon?
This,
Vargotama.
It's Vargotama, right? It's Vargotama. And think about the unfoldment of the Dasha sequence again. Whose period was she born in?
Venus.
Venus.
At the very beginning of Venus, right? So it would have been first 20 years of her life, followed by?
Sun.
Followed by?
Moon.
Moon. It was actually in the moon major period in a foreign country where she set these records for which she is, had her greatest athletic success, her greatest athletic fame in the 100 and 200 meter sprint. Does anybody want to take a guess at what the sub-period was?
Venus.
Venus.
No, but it's not a bad guess. I could see why you would guess that. I probably would have done that myself, but go with the yoga.
Moon with Moon Jupiter.
It was Moon Jupiter.
Moon Jupiter.
It was the period and sub-period of the Vargotama moon. And then again, think about the combinations that Jupiter is involved in, both Raja Yoga from the in the 3rd house from the birth lagna, and then Raja Yoga again involving the Yoga Karaka from the moon. So it was Moon Jupiter that she had this great success and fame. I want you to see these planets in the D10 where they both fall in angles or trions, and see the Sambandha. The moon is in Jupiter's sign, and Jupiter is where?
In Aquarius.
In Aquarius. What do we always think about when we think about Jupiter in Aquarius?
Exalted.
Exalted.
Like Karka, as it says in Brihad Jataka, like an exalted planet. It was Moon Jupiter. Now, I mentioned that she suffered the misfortune of, at least especially for her loved ones around her, dying at age 38 from an epileptic seizure in her sleep. It was her Mars-Mercury period. How does this period bring her in? By what principles of Jyotish?
Eighth Lord Mars.
Mars is the lord of the 8th house.
And who's it with?
Is with the Maraka Jupiter.
First
Now,
Lord.
you see there's some Arishta in this chart, is there not? I mean, the Lagna Lord does not go to 6, 8, or 12, but it's in a Dushtana with the 8th Lord. Rahu's in the Lagna, and it's aspected by Saturn, the 6th Lord. Mars-Mercury together, and then with the Maraka 7th Lord Jupiter, it was in Mars-Mercury that she passed, suddenly, unexpectedly. Obviously, it was a, short span in terms of longevity.
No benefics in Kendras to save her.
So good. So what she was immediately looking for was some protective energy. There is Jupiter also as a natural benefic on the Lagna Lord, but no benefics in Kendras, which can also reduce longevity. We're going to look at one more chart here, kind of a favorite one of mine, someone who I'd be amazed if anyone recognizes their name. You saw from the article that I was very much into playing basketball growing up. And during the 60s, 1960s, this was a very renowned, famous basketball player, first at the college level and then in the National Basketball Association, the professional ranks. He was the first player actually to win the Most Valuable Player award that the league gave, first one, and was a perennial all-star, had an enormously successful career as a basketball player. I love this chart because, again, you can teach so much about Jyotish about it. And,
Fantastic chart, Mark. Fantastic.
What are some of the highlights there? Venkat, you mentioned just one and let others mention others.
The 110 exchange, first Lord,
Okay.
Sun, and the fifth.
So what has to catch your eye is the 110 exchange between Mars and the Sun, right? And it's that particular exchange, 110, is highlighted specifically in the Law Group Parashara as being a particularly powerful Raja Yoga. And of course, Mars here is going to be the 6th Lord as well. So it's the 6th Lord and the 10th in an exchange with the 10th Lord, right? What else? Somebody else?
Swa Saturn in the 3rd.
3rd Lord in the 3rd house, right? So now we see we have a very strong 3rd house, 3rd Lord, 6th house, 6th Lord. What else?
9-10 Raja Yoga, which is very pure, superior Raja Yoga.
This is one of the best combinations that you can have, folks. Now, we saw it in the chart of Barry Bonds where it was along the 3-9 axis. In a way, this is even better because the moon is not even come to complete fullness yet. It's also in its exaltation sign. It's along the 1-7 axis. The sun is got a source of strength here as a result of the exchange. And what do we see there in the 1st house, Venkat?
Buddha-Ditya Yoga.
Buddha-Ditya Yoga, right? Buddha-Ditya Yoga with Mercury getting what sort of strength?
Mercury, directional strength.
Right.
And Vargo.
And Vargotama. So, if I had to design a chart for sports success, this could, you'd be hard pressed to design a better one than this.
Well,
So,
it's not Vargotama, it's Mercury Vargotama.
No, yeah.
It's not
No, it's
Vargotama, it gets direction.
It's not Vargo.
Direction.
Gets direction. And, there's no combustion here. So this is actually very, very good Buddha-Ditya Yoga. Very good Buddha-Ditya Yoga. And, you know how I feel about Kendra relationships. The Sun, Mercury, and Mars and Jupiter are all Kendra from each other, right?
Gajakesari Yoga.
And, of course, there's Gajakesari Yoga here, too, a true Gajakesari Yoga. Why?
Repeats from all perspectives, from ascendant.
Sun, moon, and ascendant.
And there's the requisite influence of there isn't a requisite influence of a natural benefic on Jupiter, but still it's quite a substantial Gajakesari Yoga. So born in what period?
Moon.
End of
Towards
moon.
Towards the end of moon, right? So in what major period was his prime athletic years?
Rahu.
Rahu.
Rahu, followed by Jupiter. So Kumar mentioned how often, and now we've seen it. I've shown you, this is only the 7th chart I've shown you. It's like the 3rd chart, maybe 4, where they had their major athletic success in Rahu. In what way is that predictable? First of all, why is he playing sports in Rahu?
Rahu's going to act like Saturn,
Saturn.
third lord, and Rahu himself, and aspect by Mars.
And what do we know about Rahu and Aquarius?
Their own sign.
Own house.
Own sign,
Wow.
right? And who else's results does Rahu give?
Jupiter, Mars, Ketu.
Saturn, the 3rd word.
Well, Nilima mentioned that it's going to give results of Saturn, 3rd lord in the 3rd house. But then it's going to give the results of the Raja Yoga.
Because it's in Kendra and aspected by trine word Jupiter. So
Right.
it gives, yes.
So it gives Raja Yoga by association, but it also gives Raja Yoga by itself because it functions as an angle lord aspected by actually 2 trine lords. Mars and Jupiter both qualify as trine lords. So now, and then see things from Dashalag, and who wants to guess the sub-period? This is the last question of the day, folks, your last opportunity. Who wants to guess the sub-period in which he was the most valuable player?
Mars.
Not a bad guess, but this time, no cigar.
Saturn.
Sun. Rahu's sun.
Who said
Saturn.
Rahu's son? Kumar, is that you? You got it, my man. It was Rahu's son. Look where sun falls from Rahu.
10th
And,
house.
oh, beautiful.
And then see these planets in D10. I should have showed you this beforehand, probably wasn't fair. Right?
Beautiful.
Rahu in the Lagna, giving
Exalted sun.
results of the sun, who is exalted in the 9th. Actually, so many of these sub-periods, Rahu Sun, Rahu Moon, Rahu Mars, Rahu Jupiter, I mean, he was
Even Rahu Saturn looks good.
lot of very good sub-periods within the Rahu major period, but Rahu right in the Lagna here. Well, so folks, that is our discussion of the charts of world famous athletes. I really appreciate everyone's lively participation. Thought we had a very good discussion here. Now, I'm behind on my articles, but I'm going to catch up, so you'll actually get another one here within the next couple of weeks. The topic is going to be, well, I'll give you the title and you tell me what you think the topic is. The topic is Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained.
Entrepreneurship.
Entrepreneur.
Subtitle, The Astrology of Entrepreneurship. So you'll see an article about that, and then that article you just received, it should have come out in September. This will be the one for October, and then the one for November will get caught up here. I'm not going anywhere for a while. So thank you, everyone. We're going to end as we usually did with our Sanskrit prayer. Om Masato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone. Namaste.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank